The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsee, where wisdom meets business.
Hi, I'm LeFranc, and I'm the Executive.
And I'm Kristina Wiltsee, and I am the Mystic. Welcome to the Executive and the Mystic podcast, where today we are going to be talking about the dynamics of the drama triangle, the victim, the victor, and the vessel, a framework that Fred has created, I tagged on to, and we're really excited to talk about it today. But before we get into it, please subscribe or follow wherever it is that you're listening to us or watching us. That will help us so much to help other people find us.
And tell your friends. And if you want to give us any feedback, go to growth@theexecutiveandthemystic.com. Tell us topics, things you'd like to discuss. If you'd like to appear in the podcast, we will consider all those things. But let's move on to see where we stand. So part of this came about as a result of the work I was doing with Kristina. And I've lived a long enough life to know I've gone through several things. And I shared with her once, it wasn't my own theory, but just the concept that I realized in terms of, having a childhood wound. And that's really the victim stage. And then, of course, Kristina immediately came back and said, oh, there's a whole series of things about this. Let me share that with you. And that was very helpful to me. And that was what led to the progression to go from victim to victor, where you finally start taking charge of life, and then ultimately to vessel, which to me is where you finally start giving back to others. You reach the, point of contentment, or at least an ability of internal stability to consider other things. So without judgment, let's talk about what victimhood is like. So Kristina, I'm going to ask you first. Give us some examples of what a victim feels like, sounds like, can be, and why.
Absolutely. So a victim is... there's two things. There's one, standard victim is if you're the person or somebody who's always going to tell their sob story as an effort to kind of get to some form of sympathy or kind of some sort of experience. I know I've run into a lot of different people over time who they're literally like, oh, this is the 5th time I've told this story this week. Sometimes there are bad things that are happening in our lives, and it's a really good thing to get sympathy. But there are some people who ride off of those places, and they effectively thrive in a place of being the victim, which means that they're getting, not only are they getting possible resources for help, which is absolutely needed in some circumstances, but they're also getting energy and attention and all these other things that benefit from being in the victim place. And ultimately, the victim cannot be looked at without looking at the other two positions in the drama triangle, which is the persecutor and the rescuer. Fred, you want to talk about that?
Well, what I want to reinforce that victimhood thing, because I lived in that place for a while. And, first off, a lot of these things are conditioned by how we're brought up.
Yeah.
If you're in a family that the dynamic is there, you sort of play your role. And when you're a victim, you're powerless, essentially. I'm in a bad situation. Someone did something to me, and you get a lot of people who start getting grudges and, woe is me. I never win anything. No one does anything for me. That person is special. I'm not, so forth and so on. And it all comes down to releasing your power externally to some outer event. And the danger in that, as you have heard us talk about through the ABCs, is that by giving away your power, you can't change anything. You have to wait for someone to come and help you. And you bear no responsibility for anything that happens to you, which is fascinating. Now, we're going to talk about this on the personal side, but in the business world, when you got victims in the workforce, oh my God, not always, but sadly, these are the people who will start at times have an action. They'll sue you. They'll claim something because they see everything through the lens that someone's doing something to me, as opposed to doing something for me. And people who are stuck in that victim stage are very, very, very difficult to manage, because they look to everything externally, not just for the cause of their misery, but also for what that is going to make it better. But if you attempt to help make it better, it's never good enough. And the dynamic sort of revolves around there. So now Kristina asked me a question about the persecutor and the rescuer. Well, for a victim, just about everybody's a persecutor. That's what ends up happening. So even if you appear as a rescuer initially, it can backfire on you and turn out that all of a sudden they see you as the oppressor to what they're trying to achieve. Did that explain it well enough, Kristina?
It does, yeah. I can add to it as well. Dr. Cartman, who was a psychologist, I believe, in the 70s, was the one who originally came up with the drama triangle as a concept. And I remember when I first learned about it years and years and years ago, I had this kind of fallacy in my mind about the drama triangle, thinking that a person who's a victim is always a victim, a person who's a persecutor is always a persecutor, a person rescuer is always a rescuer. And one of the things that I started to recognize was that if you recognize these dynamics as roles that are not fixed, though it may feel like they're fixed, like you may have had a parent who was abusive or a boss who was abusive, right, to you, as you would consider abusive, right? Like there was actually dynamics there that were, not in anyone's best interest, and they caused you harm, physically, mentally, emotionally, something along those lines. That person is considered a persecutor to you, but there may have been a situation in which they were the victim of another persecutor, right? And so you can see that there's this cycle of abuse or this cycle of difficulty that keeps kind of traveling down things. But beyond the person being a persecutor to you or something along those lines, people in their language are moving in and out of all of these different positions continually, right? So if I were to say, something along the lines of, "Hey, Fred, I really hate that sweater. That's the ugliest sweater I've ever seen." You could respond as the victim, right? How would you respond as the victim in that circumstance?
The victim, I didn't pick it. Someone gave it to me. I was forced to wear it, whatever the dumb reasons are. I mean, that's when you really hear this thing through different lenses is a big positive thing about it. That's what makes it difficult.
Right. Right. And then if I were to go and I would be the other person in this dynamic, and I would be, Fred's, wife or mother, or oftentimes a woman, I would be like, "Oh, but I picked that sweater out for Freddie. He's not supposed to, he's supposed to be," something along those lines, right? And then the dynamics in those three things, we can all shift in that whole conversation to basically say, "By the way, Fred, I love your sweater." But we can keep switching in those three positions, because what we recognize is that the more that you switch your position, whether you're the persecutor, right, whether you're the antagonist of the conversation and you are actively working against somebody to create a victim, or you are the rescuer and you are actively working against a persecutor or trying to save a victim, everybody's trying to get in the position of the victim. The victim is the ultimate. It is the ultimate spot where everybody, you don't have to do anything. You're not held accountable. You're not held responsible for anything. You're getting all the energy. You're getting all the attention. Who wouldn't want to be in that position when you're in those types of dynamics, right?
Yeah. Well, and also even in business now, I mentioned having victims in your workforce. Companies themselves become victims. Tariffs. Oh my God, inflation. Oh my God, the competition, all the external things. And by the way, we have to be careful here because things do happen to people, right? Bad things do happen to people. Bad things happen to companies. So, but it's like the Stoics like to say, it's not what happens, it's what you do about it that really makes a difference. That's what determines one's character. And so we're not sort of taking a broad stroke to every circumstance, that if something malicious occurs to an individual, we have to acknowledge that it's something malicious that occurred. But it's the response to that. But some of the most profound people I've ever met are the ones who took their suffering away and looked at the incident that happened to them and used that to become different. I have someone that I've met recently who, lost their young son to, brain cancer when he was 11. A few years ago. I mean, that's horrible. Okay. Now, what I see as a response is that they started a charity to help children with cancer. And so now they've taken tragedy and flipped it to go out and do good in the world. And that's sort of the example of that, not to get morbid about it. But I'd say that, on a personal level, when I sort of realized that, yeah, my parents did shit to me, I'm not happy about that. And for a long time, I lived my life in opposition to what they represented, but I was still attached to them emotionally. And the thing I learned a long time ago is just don't pick up the rope. Don't engage in something. This is back to when we talked about the universe is neutral. Things just happen. And in reality, as I got older and had my own kids, I realized, oh God, I probably wounded them too. Not intentionally, just unconsciously. And you learn to sort of forgive the situation, realize that your parents are doing the best that they could. Again, not excusing some aberrant behavior, but if you feel some sort of childhood wound, and ultimately you as a parent are doing the best that you can. And you hope to have an adult conversation with your children when they grow up to be able to say, if I did something, I apologize for that, which is what I ended up doing. But I think the bigger lesson to go from victim to victor is to realize I can take back my own power. If you find yourself in a hole, filled with muck and flotsam, and you want to blame someone for it, good luck trying to get out of there. But if you're willing to say, if I'm in this situation, I am responsible, therefore I can get myself out. Okay, you might have been an unwitting participant, and that's part of the realization. You wake up realizing my life is miserable. This is horrible. And instead of choosing to blame everyone around you, just say, what am I responsible for? Really, that's the starting question. What am I responsible for? And therefore, if I am responsible, I can do something about it. And that's liberation in a big way.
That is. There's, someone once taught me, and I know, Fred, we've talked about this, the idea that there are 4 linguistic events, right? There's promise and request, which is something that I practice a lot in my family because everybody in my family used to have a very bad habit of saying, I need a fork, as opposed to, hey, Mom, can you go get me a fork? Right? Or something along those lines. Promise and request. But the other 2 are declaration and assertion. Declaration says, I am in a hole. Assertion says, I am in a hole because you pushed me in here. Or I am in a hole because taxes are awful and I hate the government. I am in a hole because, I did this and this and this. And the thing that I always have a tendency to say is that assertion as a general rule, this is a very general rule, and it's not necessary. There's obviously exceptions to this. When you speak an assertion, there's a lot of power that you give away, and it has a tendency to be very victim based in its reality, right? Because it's saying, I did this and I'm not going to own the position that I'm in. I'm doing it because something else happened. And that's my explanation for why this has happened. And being able to shift from assertion to declaration. There are some people who speak too much in declaration, right? And they can kind of, especially if I were to say to you, Fred, you're sad. That would not be helpful. That would not be a helpful declaration, right? Because that's your space. But,
Yeah, because you're defining someone else's feelings for them. That's not our place.
Exactly. You need to honor sovereignty of each individual to be able to judge who they are and how they are, but then also recognize that when it comes to yourself, the more that you can speak in declarations, the more that you are not in a victim place that says, I am a mean person because my mother was mean to me, or something along those lines.
All right. And again, for those of you who are listening to this, many of these behaviors sort of pop up. What we're trying to do is raise awareness, because that's what we've gone through, that listen to the language you use. That's the best example. Just listen to the language. So it tells you what your position is. Are you speaking from a position of weakness and powerlessness, or are you speaking from a position of strength and conviction and courage? And I'll tell you that as you transition from victim to victor, it just doesn't happen overnight. You can have the realization, but it's a process. So be kind to yourself in that regard. If you slip up, you slip up. You're not going to win the lotto necessarily immediately, but maybe you will one day. But more importantly, you begin to change the nature of your dialogue, inner dialogue, and then your relationship with others. Because you stop looking for other people to rescue you all the time. You stop getting fed by being the victim and everyone sort of rushing to your aid and defense, which, by the way, can be pretty addictive. That's the challenge with it. It's a little bit like, oh, this isn't too bad. Everyone's sort of coddling me, and you see that in other people, and you do start, by the way, observing other people's behavior. Who around you is showing that they've taken charge of their life and are coming from that place, and who around you remains in victimhood. And then, as a business, are you going to look at the market and just say, you know what, the environment shifted? Okay, that's just a fact. Okay, now what do I need to do to adjust to that? Okay, that's taking back your power as a business. And as a leader of a business, this is the role you must play. And again, I've always said that the culture of a company is the thumbprint of the CEO, whoever's running that business. And that mindset of, we're not going to just constantly point externally to things that are causing our poor performance. We will look at the factors that affect us, and we will do something about it. And I jokingly tell people, if you don't want to get wet when it rains, get an umbrella. There's no bad weather, only bad clothes. And the same thing happens in the business environment. That things have shifted, and God knows in the last 5 years, this economic environment external has shifted dramatically and continues to do so. I mean, it's this like my metaphor of whitewater rafting. It keeps on going. It doesn't stop. And we're going to be on it for a while. So if anything, just get used to the fact that there'll always be challenges. There'll always be questions to be asked. There's always solutions to be found. Instead of being dismayed by it, just say, that's the rules of the game and we're in the game. So let's move on.
This episode is brought to you by Results Through Strategy. Since 2006, RTS has been the go-to partner for restaurants and food service brands, navigating growth, transformation, or recovery. Their team of seasoned industry veterans helps companies rediscover their purpose, realign with their values, and implement strategies that build measurable, sustainable performance.
So we're back, and we're going to be talking about the victor stage of victim, victor, vessel. And Fred has asked me the question is like, how are some ways that you can identify if you're moving into the victor stage? So one of the things that I think it's really important that we mentioned and talked a lot about when we were talking about victims is this idea that power and energy and all these different things are something that comes back to you when you become the victor. When you enter into what some people call the empowerment dynamic, which is kind of the elevated state of what it means to be a victor, or in the empowerment dynamic, it is the experience of becoming the victor, or even becoming the tender, vulnerable part, or the creator. I've heard it talked about in many different ways of like what that position elevates to, right? It's like you're not manipulating people by trying to get their energy to support your position. You are sovereign in yourself, and your power and your energy come back to you. So one of the things that I think it's really important to recognize is that when you don't pick up the rope, like Fred says, the drama triangle is addictive in every way, shape, or form. I don't know if there is actually a more addictive psychological dynamic. It's estimated that over the majority of all conversations that go on in almost all language, especially Western cultures, is the drama triangle. So the example of becoming the victor it's a feeling of knowing that somebody else is going to try and draw you into their drama, right? And you are going to not take the bait. And you're going to say, I know that I've been trained and conditioned to feel guilty. So if you're a traditional rescuer, I've been trained and conditioned to feel guilty about this. If you're a traditional persecutor, I know that I want to blame somebody else for what's happened to me, and I'm going to choose not to do that right now. Right? I'm also not going to internally, there's an internal drama triangle as well, which we won't even really get into. You can then internally blame yourself and criticize yourself and become your own critic of how to do that. And then if you're the victim and you're trying to become the victor, as you say, yeah, circumstances are not great, but how can I see this as a gift? How can I see this one? Stephen Colbert has an amazing interview with Anderson Cooper in which he says, I truly see the whole world as a gift, as no matter what the circumstance, and he's had a difficult life, no matter what the circumstances, I see this as a gift. And those are the moves that we see of turning from victim to victor.
Well, Stephen Colbert, to give it context, lost a father and brothers in a plane crash when he was a young boy. And when in that interview, when he expressed that he's grateful for everything that's happened in his life, good or bad, Anderson Cooper got choked up because of that, because he knows the tragedy that Stephen Colbert went through. And there's many other heroes on this planet that are not as famous who have taken tragedy and turned it into triumph, because that's exactly what going from victimhood to victor is you take tragedy and turn it into triumph, albeit not the way you wanted it, but because of the reaction to the circumstance that occurred to you. And that's the opportunity you have. I mean, the one thing that we've always been told as human beings, we have free will, okay? And free will essentially says we have choices. And if we're just in a reaction mode, which is we're unconscious, we're just reacting, like an animal just reacts out of instinct, we're going to do something that really sometimes can hurt us and sort of bites us. When you have a millisecond of pause, the space between a cause and an effect, to make a choice, to say, how do I choose to respond to this? That's where we create our humanity. That's where we invoke our free will to say, nope, I'm not just going to react. I have the urge. I'm going to make a choice. And that choice is intentional. And that's when you're a victor, you begin to make much more intentional choices. And the beautiful thing about it is you begin to create the life that you want. Not perfect now. Okay. So keep in mind, life is not about everything easy breezy for the next 40 years. There will always, always, always be challenges, but the challenges, you begin to see them not as challenges that are there to pull you down. These challenges are there to strengthen you. And who you become as a result of accepting the challenge and dealing with it is the outcome of your life. And in that journey, we can do much better.
Yes, I remember for a long time, I used to have a friend of mine who would call me up, call me out, and they would say, I would be telling a story. I would be, doing something along that type, because I was very guilty of being in the victim place for a very long time, especially before I learned about the drama triangle and kind of how addictive it was, because that was a really comfortable space for me to be in. And I remember this friend called me out and said, Kristina, right now that world is happening to you. How can you make it so that the world is happening for you or with you? And I would just be like, I know, you're right. I got to change that. I got to do this. But what would happen is that in that time period when I was really deeply going through the drama triangle and really deeply wanting to pass my pain on to somebody else, because that's what the experience of breaking through and becoming the victor was like for me, was literally like I wanted a hit of blaming somebody else for something and to feel bad for myself. It was like a drug. And so I would just feel this experience of, I would get angry. Something would happen that didn't quite work for me. And I would see it as happening to me. Like, oh, this person did this thing and they happened to me. And I would get so much pain in my chest, like literal physical pain in my chest, like emotional pain. And I would just have to be like, my job is not to create some false argument in my head or false what if or scenario in my head. I would just go for a walk. And I would go for a walk and I would feel the pain. I would feel the pain of what it felt like to not pass on the upset or the anger or the discomfort, and to take responsibility for either a mistake that I made or something that's happened that I wanted to pass on to somebody else, right? Because, oh, that person criticized me and I didn't like the way that they talked to me, right? It's like, okay, so that person's trying to give you feedback. You made yourself the victim by basically, what's called darvoing, which is where you get defensive, you attack, and then you reverse the victim and the offender, right? Like that's classic tactic that happens a lot with victim people, right? Is that, if somebody tries to turn, if I were to turn around and say to somebody, you really hurt my feelings, that person would be like, I can't believe the way you're talking to me right now, right? And it's like classic switching, right? Because that feeling of having to take responsibility for yourself and truly grow up and mature can be exceptionally painful. And you have been taught your whole life to not do it. And
Right.
So for me, I would go on those walks and eventually the pain would dissipate.
Well, you're describing an ego death, because you go from victim to victor. You have to release the old paradigm. You have to release those old beliefs that you are powerless, that someone did something to you. You got to let that go, and to really let it go. I mean, there is an ego death because you're redefining who you are. You come into this planet as a new human being, even though you're still on the same planet, but your whole perspective changes. And that's powerful. And what I want to do very quickly is just to go through Kristina mentioned the empowerment dynamic, where you take the three roles of victim, persecutor, and a rescuer, and you flip them, where the victim becomes the creator, where you accept responsibility, you make choices, you feel capable and confident. And the creator is really the victor, right? And then the persecutor, who is aggressive and blames people for their misery and attacks and is self-righteous, shifts to the challenger. And instead of abusing people, gives people a challenge to be their better selves, their better angels, and that's a big shift too. Because the persecutor is usually an angry person. You go from being angry to being kind, and then just letting people grow and mature. And instead of being angry at someone because they don't know something, like, gee, you're stupid, they become saying, I think you're capable of more, and it creates opportunity for the individual. It doesn't accuse them, doesn't define them. It releases them from whatever may be holding them back. And then the rescuer, and rescuers love being rescuers. Oh my God. I mean, they're like, and I was telling them, what, leave your crucifix in the garage. We don't need that anymore. Is you shift to a coach where you support other people's sovereignty, to use, Christina's statement, and allow them to own their own life and their own experience. You can't live someone else's life for them. We got one life to live, and it's our life. Let's live ourselves fully. If you want to be the example to somebody else, that's great. But to encourage others as a challenger, or to encourage other people as a coach and support them, is the thing you want to do. That's we want to explain that. And if you haven't read it, The Empowerment Dynamic by David Emerald, who I had a pleasure to meet while he was still alive, is a beautiful book to help you understand this. Because when I work with companies, we see this cycle of victimization over and over and over again. And we try and explain this to them so they can sort of turn it around and release it. At the end of the day, you can't make someone change. They can only choose to change themselves if they want to. But life is an uncanny way of constantly putting those dirty holes to stop and realize, maybe, just maybe, I had something to do with this. And I'm not going to blame someone for that.
Yes, that's lovely, and thank you for explaining that, because I think it's like, it was funny just earlier today. I've worked with a lot of people with the drama triangle in general, because it's such a useful tool to be able to help people see a way of being that they have. It's like it's people can understand it when you start to explain it. And it was so funny because this person, she was like, I really want to go clean slate. I really want to go clean slate, and I want to like make sure I don't owe anybody money, and I just want to make sure that that's the case. And I was like, okay, so what about all the people who owe you money? And she was like, no, I'm not gonna worry about that. And I was like, if you want to go clean slate with this, it's wonderful that you're taking responsibility for yourself. But there is just as much of an energetic connection with the people who owe you money as the people who you owe. And she's like, oh, but I don't care. I just gave them that money. I was like, they may not know that. They may not know that. And if you want to let it go, you really got to let it go and recognize that remnant of the rescuer that she's been working with for years needs to move away. I always say, if you ever want to know the difference between the rescuer and the coach, just imagine, am I jumping in the shark infested waters with a life preserver, or am I throwing the life preserver in and coaching and telling the person how to get to it? Right? Like, that's the kind of clear distinction between the two. Am I the coach on the sidelines who's telling them and coaching them and preparing my team to be able to execute? Or am I the one who's in there and I'm going to take over and I'm going to do the presentation even though I wasn't supposed to, or I'm going to go play the game even though I'm not the best person to play the game, but it's just because I'm trying to rescue it? And then the difference between the challenger and the persecutor is that the challenger is curious, genuinely curious, and they ask questions. It's not something that's modeled a lot in our culture, because people who are persecutors who are like, my opinion's right and you need to listen to my opinion, that can come across absolutely as a persecutor. If instead you invite the person to reflect on their own, knowing the fact that if you try and if you try and enforce your own opinion on another person, they're just going to see you as a persecutor. They're not going to take your advice. Whereas if you become the challenger, then you're inquisitively asking, is that really, does that feel like it's the best economic decision for you? Not, are you really making the best economic decision right now? That would be a persecutor, right? The way you deliver it, the way you do things are all very important for those dynamics and how you move into the empowerment dynamic.
Yes, we have our Yoda moments, or it sort of flips the script. So the last stage that we're going to talk about is vessel. And this sort of came to me one day as a result of working with Kristina, when she sort of mirrored back to me that at times I do impart some wisdom to other people that is helpful of them. And as I thought about that a little bit more, I realized this certain thing is that you get past the drama of being a victim. Fine, you become a victor, you have an intentional life, you're making things happen, you're creating the life that you want. And then it kind of, like we just explained, between like a coach. What is a coach? And the vessel is the personification, along actually with the challenger and coach, because they're both present in it, where again, you're not living someone else's life. You're not here to save the world. You're not here to save anybody. You're here to just live your life fully. But you find people who are in some need, or they have questions of you. They may be in late victim stage, or they may be in early victor stage. But they seek direction because they may seek you out. And now what can you try and do? And vessel to me is when you've contained enough wisdom and experience in life and humility, because you realize that you can't be cocky about this. Oh, I got it all figured out. Let me tell you how to do this. Okay. None of us are Moses coming off the mountaintop with 2 stone tablets. We just live the life. But the people that I turn to for advice in my life are usually the quiet people. They're very quiet. They're very self-assured, but they radiate greatness. Their sense of self and presence is so strong. It's like a magnet at the same time. And yet they're very humble people. They're soft-spoken. And the vessel is the one now that has enough within that it can now give to other people freely without attachment, without conditions, without tell me how wonderful I am because I helped you. And that's a wonderful place to be. But the humility is part of it. The sense, not of wisdom where I've learned everything, but of the wisdom to know what questions that need to be asked. Kristina mentioned earlier curiosity. And the curiosity is really there. We've talked before about the universe is neutral, and that concept that stuff happens and we don't know what the intention is behind it always. We are the ones that put meaning on it. And when you're in that if you can get yourself in a state of being the vessel, you begin to see events as they unfold as merely that. It's just unfolding. We don't know what's going to happen next. But if we trust and believe that the outcome is going to be what we want it to be, a good outcome, then the process by which we get there, tacking through this, we talked about the sailboat analogy before, is one where we trust in that, have faith that it's going to be good, and are able to help people in that regard. And ultimately, we are able to empower people to bring out their better nature, to bring out themselves. That's really what I have found to be the distinct stage of now being in the vessel era.
Yes. Yes, I would agree. The way that I love to think of it is victim. Imagine that you are a seedling in the middle of the desert. The victim feels the sun. It feels the lack of water. It's looking for that one drop of rain or that one, experience with rain. The victor has found that underground aquifer, and they're able to grow and be able to thrive. And that sometimes that underground aquifer is literally just a change in perspective,
yeah.
Right? The vessel is the tree who creates the shade for everybody else. The tree doesn't create the shade. I mean, you can look at, forest dynamics or whatever. And obviously many, many large shady trees do act as nurseries for smaller, younger trees. But, they are just in the process of living their life to the full spread of their canopy, right? In all directions, fully living their experience. And they have qualities that we can see. Those qualities are, like Fred said, humility, goodwill. Oh my God. The cultivation of goodwill as a phenomenon in this world would do so much, right? Knowing that there's no limitation, that if you were to wish someone well and truly wish them well, then all the world is truly collaborative. It isn't actually competitive. Again, looking at forest dynamics, competitive happens when there's an open canopy spot, but in general, the vast majority of all stable ecosystems are collaborative, right? Knowing that there's an aspect of goodwill, knowing that there's an aspect of abundance, that you feel an abundance in your life, even if it's not in all areas of your life. We can start to develop vessel capacities in certain parts of our life. And then we can start to spread it to the other parts of our life as well, where we become the vessel that waters the rest of our soul, right? Or the rest of our footprint in our life. Those are all qualities that come off the shading tree. And I think that that's a really important way of seeing how we move from low on Maslow's hierarchy, right, in which it feels like we don't have enough and that things are out to get us, or something along those lines, to self-actualization, which is that next row up in Maslow's hierarchy, in which that's the victor. It's like I have the capability to self-actualize, right? But I'm still self-oriented. To now I'm ready to go into transcendence, self-transcendence. I'm just transcending beyond myself, not because I'm trying to rescue or save anybody else, but because I feel the full flowering of my being.
Yeah, that's so beautifully put. I think that as I think about it for the listeners, ask yourself, can you remember these stages? You remember as a child, even older than that, being a victim. And then the day you stepped into your own self to say, nope, I'm going to take charge of my life and I'm not going to be a victim of circumstances. I will now be the one that creates the reality that I want. And are you approaching being a vessel? Now, what I'd say to you, the emotion that sort of allows you to grow across all three stages to me is gratitude. If we start focusing on what we are grateful for that we already have, in victimhood, you begin to see life differently. You begin to realize I have a lot more richness than I thought that I had. And you can begin to also give yourself some credit for giving that self to you as well, right? I mean, that's taking your power back means you give yourself credit for things you've done that are good. If you're brought up in a shame-based culture where no matter what you do, it's bad because you did it, as opposed to a guilt-ridden culture where, you did something wrong, but you're still loved. It's shame. No one loves you. Gratitude for what I already have is the kernel that can strengthen. It grows and grows and grows. And when you get into being a victor, the gratitude practice should grow because here you're now being intentional. Okay, you're thinking about what you want. You're grateful for having received it, even though it hasn't come yet. But it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. Then we get to the point of vesselhood. It's because you're really grateful for everything. And the gratitude for it allows you to share that gratitude with other people, to point out to them what in your life is going well. Who did that? Was it you or was it someone else? Right? And yeah, our parents gave us life, but it's our choice to live it or not. And that's where it comes. So gratitude, I'd say, is one of the most powerful emotions that I've discovered outside of love. It's right up there with love, especially in this material world we live in, to begin to look at the many things we have that other people don't have and not to feel guilty about having them. There's no apology for having abundance. It's just the gratitude that you have it and to create it. And this gratitude just makes you stronger and stronger and stronger in character. And that's the feeling that I think the wise people in my life embody. It's just a tremendous gratitude. A very close friend of mine, in a conversation I had with him, and Kristina knows this, once said to me, Fred, don't focus on what you don't want. Focus on what's all around you. That's love. It's just all around you. Just reach out. It's always available to you. That was a beautiful realization that I had to help me understand this even better.
Yep. No, thank you so much for pointing that out and for bringing that up because, I always say that gratitude is the great lubricant of life. It's what helps us move from one perspective to another easily and effortlessly. And the experience, I usually say that gratitude is a currency of love, right? That when you create an exchange of gratitude with yourself and another person, with yourself and some other aspect of yourself, with yourself and your past self, with yourself and your future self, anything that you want to create an exchange with, then love is allowed to flow through that same space. That's what you're exchanging for effectively. And the more that we can practice indiscriminate gratitude, which says, I'm grateful for what I have and what I don't have. I'm grateful for what I want and what I don't want. You're allowing all the channels to open full blast so that things can come into your life that you never even expected. That will help to shift the mentality between victim and victor, and also fundamentally change the level in which you're operating, right? Because whether we liked, whether the terms frequency or whatever has been overused, or people say, oh, well, everything can be weaponized, especially in the kind of woo-woo new age talk. I think that frequency is one of those, especially if people use it as a way to block themselves off from other people or say like, well, I have a higher frequency than you. I'm not going to interact with you. That may be the truth, but that's not something that you need to use to persecute another person.
All right.
But ultimately, when we start to say, when you start to interact with gratitude, with the empowerment dynamic as a vessel in whatever you can, life, I don't know which one it is. I can't tell. I don't know, Fred, if you have an opinion on this. I don't know if it's that life gets easier and things just kind of flow more effortlessly, or you're kind of okay with it, so then they flow more effortlessly anyway. Like, I don't know which one came first.
Well, I think the second statement, I think, is the one I resonate with. It's not so much that life gets easier, it's that because we don't have attachment to outcomes when they occur, when events occur, and then therefore get a disappointment if it doesn't happen the way we want it to. That's what creates the stress. I mean, that's the Buddhist philosophy of, just let things go. Suffering is because we get attached to things. So non-attachment is because you don't look at an event and immediately catastrophize it or define it. And I said earlier, once you accept the fact that there's always going to be challenges, but they're there for you. They're not there to you. They're there for you. Life's not happening at you. It's happening for you. Then you just embrace it. And it's not a big deal. I think you do get into a flow stage at that point because you stop resisting. If I'm back to my whitewater rafting, I'm not paddling upstream to get away from the rocks that I'm going to be running into or the waterfall I'm going to be going over. I'm going with it. And I'm using the energy of the flow to let me guide it wherever I want it to go. That's really what it comes down to. And I'd say that as we wrap up this conversation, I do want to express some gratitude, first off, to the listeners. Whoever's listening to this, thank you so much for taking the time out of your life to listen to this. And we really, really hope this offers something valuable for you to reflect on. And we'd love to hear from you. And the other one is, Kristina, I want to thank you for being you. I'm very grateful to have you in my life. It's made a big, big difference. And I want to make sure I acknowledge that. That's very important to me.
I'm going to return the same sentiment to you, Fred. Fred, you have given me an amazing new perspective, widened my perspective, and provided me with so much support and confidence, as well as so much love that I'm just incredibly grateful for you. And thank you. Thank you for being with me here today, and thank you to all our listeners who are listening. We would love to hear, back from you if you guys are liking the episodes. Fred dropped the email at the beginning: growth@theexecutiveandthemystic.com.
Great. All right, Kristina. With that, thank you so much, and we'll tune in next time.
Thank you.
The Executive and the Mystic podcast, co-hosted by Fred LeFranc and Kristina Wiltsee, where wisdom meets business.